Hippocrates was a Greek doctor, and he is the one that is responsible for writing the Hippocratic Oath. And there are some things that he said, and there are some things that he didn't say. Did you know part of the Hippocratic Oath that says, do no harm? He didn't write that part. That came in some other time after. And there are some other things that people attribute to him, like the idea that your food is your medicine and your medicine is your food. They say it was him. Nobody really knows where it came from. Evidently, it was not him. But does not mean the ideas that were attributed to him were bad. It seems to make good sense. And the subject that we're looking at today is living your longest life. Leafy green vegetables like kale, spinach, arugula, and so on are high in vitamin C and a host of other vitamins. They contain antioxidants. So when that saying, the medicine is in the food and the food is the medicine, that saying is really not that far off. Berries are extraordinarily good for you. They're high in fiber, vitamins, and antioxidants. Nuts and seeds are packed with protein, healthy fats, and vitamins. Sweet potatoes are a good source of carbohydrates, vitamins, and minerals. All this good stuff that God's placed in the food. Simple oats are amazingly nutritious, containing soluble fibers, and they're filling, so it helps with weight loss as well. Makes you wonder where we would be if we as a people simply stuck with what God had provided for us in the food. And it's all good for us. Apples, whole grains, walnuts, avocados, broccolis, onions, all of these things are so good for us. Then it begs the question, then why are we so sick today? If all of the medicine or if all of the medicine, the food that God has made is packed with so much good things, why are we so sick today? And I think you know as well as I do, it's because we'd much rather have this rather than the stuff that God has created. And even the good stuff, we take it and we slather it in butter and dump a ton of salt on it, fill it with sugar, fry it in fat. And no wonder that we are struggling with some health issues today. You know, we take water and we add flavorings and 9 teaspoons of sugar. And there are some that this is all they drink, and it's no wonder that our health suffers. You take your popular cereals, and it's just pumped with enough sugar to sink a battleship. And then we send our kids off to school and wonder why they can't sit still, wonder why they can't pay attention. Could it be some connection with our diet? God created wheat, but someone took the roughage out of it and started to make bread that's highly refined white flour. And the white flour digests rapidly, and it causes significant fluctuations in blood sugar. And I think that we can all agree it's far from ideal. Now, there are those of us that we have some health complexities, no question about that. There are things that are beyond our control. But there are things that we have in our control as well. And if we can't control the things we can't control, I want to be able to control the things that I can control. I think we can all agree that smoking is bad for us. There is something that is cause and effect. We do something like that, and it rapidly increases our chances of cancer, emphysema, raises blood pressure, all of these things. So there is every action has an equal and opposite reaction. And I could go on a whole list of issues that alcohol causes as well. And we're going to dive a little bit deeper into this as we go. But I think we can agree that there are things that we probably ought not to be doing with our bodies. And the human body is fragile. And there's a lot that can go wrong with it, and often does. And you just look at some ideas, they don't even know what causes them or how to stop them. ALS, Alzheimer's, and that seems to affect older people primarily. Parkinson's disease. So we as humans on planet Earth are riddled with these things that are out of control. But there are things that are within our control that can certainly make life better for us. The CDC says 85% of Americans over the age of 60 are using prescription drugs, and almost 1 in 5 kids under the age of 12. The most commonly used drug for people between the ages of 20 to 59, antidepressants. Antidepressants for that practically 30-age-year gap. Most common drug, antidepressant. Now, don't get me wrong. If a person needs medication, they need to be taking the medication. But again, it makes you wonder, how did we get to this in the first place? How did we get there? You know, about 659,000 people in the United States die from heart disease every year. That's 1 in 4 deaths. 1 in 4 deaths is from heart disease. And it costs the United States $363 billion a year in health care. $363 billion. There's a heart attack almost every 40 seconds. And this is one that is largely related to lifestyle issues. So if the way that I live my life can actually decrease the chances of that, well, I think that's something that we should definitely consider. Americans consume about 3,400 milligrams of salt per day, even though the recommended daily intake is 2,300. How much was the average American? Did you catch the number? 3,400. How much should we have? 3,400. Yeah, we should have less than 2,300. You can easily get 1,800 milligrams of salt in one burger. In fact, there's one burger chain out there that has a burger that has more than 2,800 milligrams of salt just in it. There's another restaurant out there that has a meal, which the meal has 13,000 milligrams of salt just in one meal. So our body is only designed to process and to manage so much of that. So if we keep putting in what it's not capable of managing, well, then the system begins to break down. We are actually digging ourselves into a grave 1 spoonful at a time. I think we can agree that this is far from God's ideal. Far from God's ideal. So what is God's ideal? We go back to Genesis chapter 1, verse 29, and it says, "See, I have given you every herb that yields seed, which is on the face of all the earth, and every tree whose fruit yields seed, to you it shall be for food." So if we were looking for a food plan, a menu that God would have, the Garden of Eden would be a good place to look for it. Because when He created it, it was good and it was right. He did it right the first time around. So what can we learn from the Garden of Eden? And then, not long after there was perfection, we lost perfection. We didn't have it very long. Genesis chapter 3, that old devil comes in, and what's the first thing he starts to manipulate? Diet. "Has God indeed said, you shall not eat of every tree in the garden? And the woman said to the serpent, we may eat of the fruit of the trees of the garden, but of the fruit of the tree which is in the midst of the garden, God has said, you shall not eat it, nor shall you touch it, lest you die. Then the serpent said to the woman, you will not surely die." God was very clear, eat this, don't eat that. Not everything that's on earth was designed to be ingested. And when God's people relied on Him, followed Him, there were benefits. And when there wasn't, then there was repercussions. If we get into the book of Acts, there was a very, very famous council meeting, and they were trying to work out some things in the church. We know it now as the Jerusalem Council. And if we fast forward there to Acts chapter 15, we see that they were trying to reestablish or confirm some dietary things that were placed in the Old Testament. "I judge that we should not trouble those from among the Gentiles who are turning to God, but that we write to them to abstain from things polluted by idols, from sexual immorality, from things strangled, and from blood." Evidently, it was a good New Testament teaching not to eat blood, and specifically because it was from an Old Testament teaching. Now, why something that's not strangled? Why not eat that? Well, it's multifactorial, actually. Number one, it was connected with other sacrifices in other religions. So this was connected with pagan sacrifices. Number two, it kept the blood in the body. It kept the blood in the muscles. So they would eat that, and the Bible's very clear not to eat the blood. So when the animal was executed properly, drained of all of its blood, much biblically safer to eat. Back in Leviticus, God stated that the life of the flesh is in the blood. You know, you'll find a lot of God talking about eat this or don't eat that with the animals. You'll never find God saying don't eat the fruit. Except for the fruit of the tree of knowledge of good and evil. That one he said don't eat that. I realized I just blew my entire point right there. 3 John verse 2. Beloved, I pray that you may prosper in all things and be in health just as your soul prospers. So this is John in his third letter here, the third epistle. One thing that he's saying is, we want you to be in good health. God wants us to be in good health. In fact, prosper in all things. Another translation says above all things. What does God want for us? Good, healthy life. Why? Not so we can live longer, so we can sin longer, so we can burn longer, but why? So we can live longer, happier, healthier, and continue the work that he has set us on as well. John chapter 6, verse 56, Jesus said, he who eats my flesh and drinks my blood abides in me, and I in him. They were challenging Jesus on this. They thought he was talking about cannibalism. Obviously, Jesus is speaking symbolically. He's talking about communion. But there's a connection here. You eat well, you live well. And the same thing with spiritual food. You eat well, you live forever. Jesus is saying, in a sense, trust in me, follow me, I'm going to get you there. John 6, 53 to 55. Jesus said to them, most assuredly I say to you, unless you eat the flesh of the Son of Man and drink his blood, you have no life in you. Whoever eats my flesh and drinks my blood has eternal life, and I will raise him up at the last day. For my flesh is food indeed, and my blood is drink indeed. So God says there is a plan of what to take in and what not to. But we love our sweets, don't we? You know, I've been to a lot of health presentations and they kind of focus on one thing and then they leave out the sweets. And let's be honest, we eat it because it tastes good. If it didn't taste good, God wouldn't have to say limit or don't eat this at all. But, if we ate a dessert once in a while or on special occasion, probably be okay. Actually, the Old Testament does say a little honey is good for us. A little sweetness is good for us. But we have, as humans, we've learned to manipulate that off switch. And we don't operate the off button very well. And food engineers today, there's a lot of science that goes into food like this. And they actually hire scientists and engineers to create the food to make it so it's just sweet enough, but not too sweet to where you don't want any more. So they've actually engineered to be addictive. It has addictive properties to it. So let's see the value that God places on our body. 1 Corinthians chapter 6, verse 19. This is what Paul in his first letter to the church in Corinth said. Do you not know that your body is the temple of the Holy Spirit who is in you, whom you have from God, and you are not your own? Some may say, well, it's my body, I can do whatever I want to with it. Actually, it's not. It's God's body because he created you, and then he died for you to buy us back. So the body is God's twice over. For you are bought with a price, therefore glorify your God in your body and in your spirit, which are God's. Let me back up. And what does the Bible, you can say it out loud here, how does the Bible describe our body? What does it describe it as? Temple. Imagine you came to church one day, and whatever church, maybe you're from, whatever, that church that holds that special place in your heart, and you pull up, and at first you think, when you get to church, there's a sense of, man, I'm going to the right place. That's where God is. That's where God's people are. And now imagine you pull up and you see spray paint all over the outside of the church, graffitied all up. And the church is not usually graffitied. And then you see steel rods shoved through the windows, and somebody lit a fire in the sanctuary. Smoke is billowing out the windows. And how would that make you feel about God's church? It would make you upset, wouldn't it? I mean, this is God's place of holy worship. Who would do such a thing? Yet, we do the very same thing to our own bodies. And how much more valuable is our body than this building of brick and mortar and stone? God places an incredibly high value on his people. So it makes good sense why the devil would want to manipulate our health. We go back to the Bible book of Daniel. In Daniel chapter 1, we looked at Daniel numerous times throughout this series. We started in Daniel chapter 2, and we kind of did a quick flyby of Daniel chapter 1. When Daniel and his friends were brought into Babylon, one of the things that King Nebuchadnezzar wanted to do was to change, their identity. I mean, he changed their name. He tried to change everything about them because it all related to their relationship with God. And one of the things that he tried to change also was their diet. In Daniel chapter 1, verse 8, but Daniel purposed in his heart that he would not defile himself with the portion of the king's meat, nor with the wine which he drank. Therefore he requested of the prince of the eunuchs that he might not defile himself. This is a pretty bold move from Daniel. Why? Because he's one of the wise men, or about to be. So he's in a way being brought into the inner circle of the king. So to sit at the king's table is an extremely high thing that many people would want to do. But he says, he purposed in his heart that he would not defile himself with the portion of the king's meat. Why? Well, there's several things wrong with what the king had on his table. We're going to talk about some of that. Number one is some of the food was grown in gardens that were dedicated to other idols, other gods. And he said, I can't eat that. That's dedicated to some other gods. And there were some other things that were just in clear violation of God's health principles in the Bible. So he says, I can't do that. And as the story goes, he asks for time. Give me a time. Give me 10 days. Let me eat what I'm used to. And he was on a pretty strict diet. And you compare us with the other. The guy that was in charge of them was a little fearful. You can't just eat. Actually, he wanted to eat pulse. He wanted to be on a very strict vegan diet. And he said, you can't live off of that. You're going to get sickly. You're going to die. The king's going to have my head if you die. He said, no, give me 10 days. Test us with us and with the others that are eating that other stuff. So he allowed it. And turns out the Bible says that Daniel and his friends were fairer and fatter than the rest. Now, this is when fatter was a good thing. Full, healthy looking, not sickly looking. He was afraid that being on some diet like that would actually harm his health. Turns out it actually was a benefit to him. So not only did he have a clean and clear body, the repercussion was also a clean and clear mind. And in the very next chapter is when God used Daniel to interpret the king's dream. So what is the devil actually after? Why is diet such a big deal? Why address something like this in the middle of a Bible prophecy seminar anyway? We believe in freedom of choice, and we believe that the devil wants to steal that choice or limit our ability to make a good decision for God. So if we can have a clear body, we can have a clear mind that is much more effective. Let's get into some specifics here. The University of Washington released a study a few years ago that declared that no amount of drinking alcohol is safe. Yeah, and I know you've heard probably what I have heard, but in moderation. I've even seen studies that say you need to drink a glass of wine with every meal, or once a meal every day. And turns out the newer information we get actually confirms the Bible. So this idea of moderate drinking, that is not from God. It's not found in the Bible. It actually contradicts it. Now, there are good things in the wine. You know what that is? It's what's in the skin of the grape. So if you want to get the greatest benefit, you drink that grape juice. And Welch's grape juice, he knew what he was doing when God was guiding him through that. So the alcohol and everything else, not good for you. What you get is the good thing from the grape. So you can have the grape juice without all the repercussions from the alcohol. Let's see what the Bible says. Proverbs chapter 20, verse 1. Bible says, wine is a mocker, strong drink is a brawler. Whoever is led astray by it is not wise. Someone once told me, I don't drink strong drink. I don't drink the heavy stuff. Just drink a beer here or there. Beer was their strong drink back then. This 99 proof whiskey and all of that, that's relatively new invention. That wasn't even around back then. So the idea of the beer was the strong drink. Wine is a mocker. I used to work in an office. I worked in a furniture store, and I was the what was I? I was the delivery manager and a service manager. I sat at my desk, and sometimes I would have to go out on calls, but I still want my computer to be a witness when I'm not there. So I'd put Bible verses on my screen as the screensaver. So when I'm gone, there's Bible verses cycling through. And one day I put this Bible verse up, and turns out my boss that sat just a couple spots away from me had the night before that he regretted the next day, and he was paying for it. And he had the headache and all of that goes along with that. And he told somebody, he didn't tell me, he told somebody else, and they told me later, he said, every time I looked at that screen, I just shook my head. He was paying for the mistake that he had made the night before. There's a reason God said, listen, do this, don't do that. Let's be honest. Is there anything good that comes from alcohol? How many lives have been lost through car accidents? How many marriages have been destroyed from illicit behavior? Why? Because it lowers your inhibitions. And certainly not good. Traffic deaths, injuries, all of this, if alcohol weren't involved, may not have happened. How about domestic violence? How many instances of domestic violence were fueled by alcohol? Child abuse, spousal abuse, fueled by alcohol. How many people are in bars, from behind bars, that have committed crimes that were fueled by rage-induced alcoholic tendencies? So the list goes on and on and on. And we go to 1 Timothy. And you might be thinking, but wait a second, didn't Paul tell Timothy to drink a little bit of wine? 1 Timothy chapter 5, verse 23. No longer drink only water, but use a little wine for your stomach's sake and your frequent infirmities. So first of all, the reason that Paul had to even suggest this to Timothy tells us that Timothy abstained from all of this in the first place. Now, notice what the issue is. Do not drink only water, but use a little wine for your stomach's sake. So, it's been said that, you drink wine, it soothes the stomach. Any doctor will tell you it does the exact opposite. It actually causes stomach ulcers. So was Paul telling Timothy to drink alcoholic wine, or was he telling him to drink grape juice? In the New Testament and in the Old Testament, you have to look at how the word was translated. So when he's talking about drink wine, in the New Testament, you would see the phrase new wine. Actually, you'd see that in both the Old and New Testament. New wine. Well, what is new? That's grape juice. When it's old, it's been left to sit, to putrefy, to ferment. That's what causes the problems. Paul wasn't telling Timothy to drink alcohol. He was telling him to drink a little bit of grape juice to ease your stomach. And what about Jesus? Didn't he turn water into wine? And let's be honest, can you imagine Jesus at the party passing out the beer and the smokes? Can you imagine that? So this is at the wedding of Cana. Weddings would have gone on for days by this time. And by this point, all of the juice had been drank by that point. Now, if Jesus made all of this over 100 gallons of alcohol, nobody would have cared what it tasted like. It could have been tar and they still would have tasted it, because if they'd have been drinking alcohol and binging for 3 days, you could give them anything, they'd say it tastes good. But somebody said, the manager of the feast, this is the best. We've saved the best for last. They didn't do that back then, but Jesus did. What did he give them? What did he turn water into? Grape juice. Turned it into grape juice. Isaiah chapter 65, verse 8. As the new wine is found in the cluster, and one says, do not destroy it, for a blessing is in it. So will I do for my servant's sake, that I may not destroy them all. Did you know actually the Bible says in the Old Testament, it's a sin to give a neighbor, a friend, alcohol? Did you know that? So if Jesus was at the wedding of Cana, passing out enough alcohol to satisfy an entire town that would have been there, then he would have sinned. That means he wouldn't have been able to be the spotless lamb that went to the cross for us. So I think we can agree Jesus did not sin. So new wine, grape juice is what he's talking about. So, and I think we can agree that smoking is not the will of God. And when Jesus went to the cross, he didn't die so we can do these things. He died so he could break us from these things. Jesus can break us from addictions. And, even on the Surgeon General's warning, they advertise, listen, this is going to kill you. If you go to other countries, you go to Europe, you go to Asia, if you ever get a chance, in fact, Google it later today. Don't do it right now because it's kind of disgusting. Google it later today, the cigarette packages, and you'll see that they advertise the lungs all blackened on the cigarette package, teeth all rotted and missing on the cigarette package, because this is the result. And the funny thing is, people still buy it. People still buy it because it's not a cognitive decision. It becomes an emotional decision. We're creatures of emotion, not necessarily creatures of cognitive, clear decision making. So we want to make a good, clean decision for Jesus. So I guess we might as well mention caffeine as well. Caffeine disrupts the chemistry of the brain, and by affecting levels of neurotransmitters that keep the brain in balance, leading to many different mental illnesses and disorders, including depression. You look at what the most common drink is today, you turn on any TV show, any movie, virtually everybody's holding a cup of caffeinated beverage now. Why? Devil's calculating that, and it lends to mental illnesses and depression. This is from Johns Hopkins School of Medicine. Caffeine is the world's most widely used mind-altering drug. And I know what you're thinking, but I need it to get going in the morning. We need it because what we've done, we've introduced so much caffeine that it used to stimulate us, but then we've leveled out, so then you need even more caffeine, and this is what creates the addictive habit. The same with other drugs. Caffeine, it's a drug. It's just widely used, and it's just a legalized drug. So if we were to go through a withdrawal from that, and there would be a withdrawal time, and then live a clean life without the caffeine, you would notice that it would actually benefit you. I've talked to so many people, well, the caffeine doesn't affect me. That's because we've got so much of it in your system, you need more and more for it to affect you. John chapter 10, verse 10. I have come that they may have life, and they may have it more abundantly. So you tell me, what does Jesus want us to have? Life, abundant life. What does the devil want to take from us? Life. And we follow Jesus, we get life. We follow the devil, and it leads to death. We studied that clearly last night. So let's go back to Genesis chapter 5. And the oldest person in the Bible, you know who the oldest person ever was in the Bible? Enoch, because he never died. Methuselah did die. Now, how old was he? 969 years old. I wonder what his diet was like. And he died the year of the flood, and you'll notice something after the flood, the lifespans became greatly reduced. You study lifespans sometime. Before that, they were living many hundreds of years, up to 800, 700, 900 years. Something happened after the flood, and their lifespan started to decrease drastically to where the average lifespan's like 70, 80 years. What happened? Could it be that, what was Methuselah's diet? Well, let's go back to Genesis chapter 1. Genesis chapter 1, verse 29. See, I have given you every herb that yields seed. This is God. I have given you every herb that yields seed, which is on the face of all the earth, and every tree whose fruit yields seed. To you it shall be for food. If you're looking for the most perfect diet, God had right there in the Garden of Eden. It wasn't even vegetables. The original diet was fruit. They were fruitarians. And anybody here like fast food? This is the one time you can say you like fast food. You know why? Because everything was fast food in the Bible, in the Garden of Eden. It was fruit. You just walk, pick it, eat it, and go. You didn't have to prepare it. Now, quite different from today's fast food. And then sin comes, changes everything. The food starts to degrade everything. This world is not even a shadow of what it once was. Now they have to start digging and getting vegetables, and they need those extra nutrients that were no longer in the fruit. So the whole world changed, but you'll notice that what it was, God's plan in the beginning, a plant-based diet. And we fast forward to Genesis chapter 7, and so when did it go from God's ideal plant-based diet to eating animals? And doesn't the Bible say it is? Yeah, he began to make provision for it. But let's go back to the ark. When God had Noah build the ark, he was very specific on what animals would board the ark. Genesis chapter 7, verse 2, "You shall take with you 7 each of every clean animal, a male and his female, 2 each of animals that are unclean, a male and his female." Why 7 of every clean animal? Well, for one, only a biblically clean animal could be worshipped, could be used as a sacrifice. And biblically clean animals is what they would begin to consume as well. As the result of the flood, all the vegetation destroyed, not a whole lot of salad bars left open after the ark landed. So here we see a drastic change in the diet. And they began to start eating meat, but it was meat that had to be qualified because there's some that was good and maybe some that was not that good. So there was that. And God knew what he was doing. How do we get the longest, healthiest life then? So they started to pay the price for their meat. They did. The ages started to drop. But he said, well, if you're going to eat it, then here's some distinctions. Leviticus 11:3. "Among the animals, whatever divides the hoof, having cloven hooves and chewing the cud, that you may eat." So he starts to identify the different classes of animals. Here he starts to classify land mammals. Okay, if it divides the hoof and chews the cud, you may eat it. Now you tell me, what kind of animals are classified there? What chews the cud and has a split hoof? Cow. What else? Sheep. Goat. Deer. I think I heard deer. Elk. And you get the point. What is chewing the cud? You know, you see cows. I came from farm country before we moved over here, but you'd always see cows out in the field. They're always chewing. And, you know, as a kid, you might wonder, who's giving them that chewing gum? So they eat their food, then they bring it back up, chew it. It goes back down into a different stomach chamber, bring it up, chew it again, and what it does is it processes it. They have a much more complex digestive system. So it filters out much more of the impurities, and it makes their meat a little less destructive to eat. So you can see it makes good scientific sense. It wasn't God just saying willy-nilly, eat this, don't eat that. So let's continue here, Leviticus 11:4. "Nevertheless, you shall not eat among those that chew the cud, those that have..." let me read it again. "Nevertheless, these you shall not eat among those that chew the cud, or those that have cloven hooves. The camel, because it chews the cud, but does not have cloven hooves, it is unclean for you." Now, here in the United States, generally, I don't have to try to convince you to get the camel out of your freezer. Other parts of the world, we do. And we need to help folks understand God's plan for their health, and the camel evidently not the best thing to be eating. And even the hare, the bunnies, the next verse tells us that rabbits are unclean. Leviticus chapter 11, verse 7. Here's one that many of us love, the swine. "Though it divides the hoof, and having cloven hooves, yet does not chew the cud, it is unclean to you." So if we want to stay biblical, if we want to have the longest, healthiest life possible that God has prescribed for us in our food, this is probably one that we want to avoid. And, you know, if you've ever been to the hospital for some particular issues, usually one of the first things they take off of your diet is pig. And it's so high in salt. And there's another thing that it has quite a lot of, and that is trichinosis or strychnine worms. There was a woman who was shocked that she was told she had a brain tumor. When doctors opened her head and looked into her brain, what they found was a parasitic worm inside her brain. And turns out it wasn't cancer. It started with eating undercooked pork. And you might say, well, that's just for the Jews, right? Is Jesus interested in everybody's health, or he's just interested in the health of the Jews? I think we can agree he's interested in everybody's health. I was doing a Bible study with a guy one time, and he was from an older generation, and he lived through the Depression. He was a little guy through the Depression, and I remember I was studying this with him, and about the time we got to this point in our Bible study, we were sitting in his living room, the light bulb went on, just like a cartoon. You could see it, it just started to click, and he goes, let me tell you a story. I said, tell me a story. So he said, when we were in the Depression, I was a little guy, and when we were fortunate enough to get a hunk of ham, what my mom would do, she would put it out on the hot tin roof. I said, why on earth would she do something like that? And he said, I'll tell you. And what they would do, they'd leave it out, the tin roof would heat it up, and he said you could see the worms crawl up out of the meat. And then she'd scrape the worms off once she felt that they were all out, cut it up, slice it up, and feed it to us. Yeah, there's a reason God told us not to eat it. You know, you can find grade A beef. You can't find grade A pork. It's not classified. There's no such thing. They're allowed to actually sell pork with so many trichinosis worms per square inch, because it's that prevalent. Many people think that they have joint problems, think it's maybe arthritis or something, and oftentimes it's actually trichinosis worms living in the joints. So we eat it, and it's actually very hard to identify because it masks itself as so many other maladies. But is it possible it's from our sandwiches? It's from what we've been eating. Well, I know what you're thinking, but Jesus died and that was done away with. So let's fast forward beyond the cross, beyond the time of Jesus, beyond the mark of the beast, all of that stuff. And this is the return of Jesus. Isaiah 66, 15 to 17. For behold, the Lord will come with fire. Hasn't come yet, so this tells you the time. Behold, the Lord will come with fire and with his chariots like a whirlwind, to render his anger with fury and his rebuke with flames of fire. For by fire and by his sword the Lord will judge all flesh, and the slain of the Lord shall be many. Those who sanctify themselves, pay attention to this verse here, those who sanctify themselves to go to the garden after an idol in the midst, eating swine's flesh, and the abomination and the mouse shall be consumed together, says the Lord. Well, there's a few things that we need to pick apart here. Now look at this. Those who sanctify themselves. What is that word sanctify? You know it by now. What does sanctify mean? To be set apart for holy use. God has sanctified the Sabbath. He's set that apart for holy use. He has sanctified his people. He's set them apart from the world for holy use, to take a message of the gospel to the world. So, but these people, he says, those who sanctify themselves, they're the ones that are doing it on their own. I know God said this, but. I know I shouldn't do this, but. I know I should do this, but. I got it from here. Those who sanctify them, God wants to sanctify you. These people are sanctifying themselves, purifying themselves. They go to the gardens after an idol in the midst, idolatry, eating swine's flesh. So look at how it's characterized. Idolatry, because let's be honest, food can be an idol to many. That's why the devil in that first sin in the very beginning, that's why he attacked diet. It's a way that we as humans can be manipulated. It's kind of a sad thing. Eating swine's flesh and the abomination. So it's characterized with idolatry. It's characterized with an abomination as bad as a mouse. And by the way, when you see that word abomination in the Bible, this is like extremely bad thing. You search through the Bible, that word abomination, it's always associated with like the worst. And the abomination and the mouse shall be consumed together, says the Lord. So Jesus says, I've got a better way for you. And some still, they say to me on this, they say, but God created it so it's good for you. You know that we have oleander also. You know what happens if you eat oleander? You die. In fact, a while ago when we were living in Arizona, there was an animal at the zoo that got into oleander. It died. They lost a lot of money on that animal. Hemlock. Eat it, you die. Just because it's here on earth doesn't mean that God put it there to eat, for us to eat. So why did God create then the swine? They are there to be scavengers. God put them here to help clean up the earth. And their bodies are designed to keep that poison in so it doesn't filter out to the rest of the earth. So when we eat these that God has declared unclean, we're taking in all of those concentrated poisons. Leviticus 11:9 and 10. These you may eat of all that are in the water. So we've looked at the land creatures. So now let's look at the sea creatures. Whatever is in the water that has fins and scales, what does it have to have in the water? Fins and scales. Whether in the seas or in the rivers, that you may eat. Has to have fins and scales. But all that is in the sea or in the river that do not have fins and scales, all that move in the water or any living thing which is in the water, they are an abomination to you. There's that word again. So the lobster, the shrimp, and those crustaceans, you know, there was an issue with the waterway one point. They had a particular pollution problem. So what they did was they dumped a whole bunch of oysters in that waterway. Why? Because they're filters. So they cleaned up the water. And actually, you know the best place to find some of these? Right at the sewage outlets in the ocean. Why? Because they're eating what you already did. And they're filtering the water, cleaning it. So when we eat that, we're getting all that concentrated poison that our bodies can't. That's why so many people have fish allergies and so on. So God was pretty clear on this. It has to have fins and scales. You know another thing that's quite popular that does not have fins and scales, what does not have scales? Catfish. It's quite popular, especially in certain regions of this country. But remember, if we want to stay biblical, you know, if we want to please God with our mind and our body, then we probably want to follow His health plan too. Leviticus 11:13. And these you shall regard as an abomination among the birds. They shall not be eaten. They are an abomination. The eagle, the vulture, the buzzard, and it goes on. And it doesn't really give a clear distinction like split hoof, chew the cud, and fins and scales. But you can see by the birds that are listed, we want to avoid birds of carrion. If you see a bird that's eating something that's already dead, don't eat that thing. And I remember the day my dad found out why vultures have no feathers on their head. You know why they have no feathers on their head? Because when they're eating the guts of the other creature, they're not losing their feathers. And so it's kind of a fun, look that up. It's an interesting study anyway. So you don't want to eat something that something has eaten that's already dead. So what would be a good considered biblically clean bird that we can eat today? What are some clean birds? Turkey, pheasant, chicken. What did God feed His people in the wilderness? Anybody remember? Quail. So there's plenty that God has still said, listen, if you're the best is if you stay plant-based, but if you're going to choose to eat the meat, then this is what's going to be safest for you. So when Jesus died on the cross, He did not die to change the molecular structure of the fish and the molecular structure of the pork. Jesus' death on the cross did not magically pull all the trichinosis worms out of the pork. That's not, some people say, but Jesus died on the cross and He did away with all of those things. Is that why He died on the cross? Did He die for the pigs or did He die for the people? Now, some may point to Acts chapter 10 and say, but Peter had a dream and that made it okay to start eating everything, didn't it? Well, let's look into it. Acts chapter 10. This is one of those passages that many go to one verse and then stop. They don't read before, they don't read after. And remember, one of the key responsible methods of Bible study is to keep it in context. Line upon line, here a little, there a little. So if we see a passage that may not make sense with the rest of the Bible, well, we first read it in context. Am I pulling it out of context? And then we compare it with the other places in the Bible that talk about the same subject. So I think we should do that with Peter's dream. Acts chapter 10, verses 9 through 18. The next day, as they went on their journey and drew near the city, Peter went up on the housetop to pray about the 6th hour. That's noon. Then he became very hungry and wanted to eat, but while they made ready, he fell into a trance, and he saw heaven opened and an object like a great sheet bound at the four corners descending to him descending to him and let down to the earth. In it were all kinds of four-footed animals of the earth, the wild beasts, creeping things, birds of the air, and a voice came to him, "Rise, Peter, kill and eat." Let's stop right there. So why would God say, he lowers this sheet. By the way, this is a vision. Lowers the sheet, all kinds of animals in it. "Rise, Peter, kill and eat." Look at Peter's response. But Peter said, "Not so, Lord. I have never eaten anything common or unclean." Let's stop there. This is Peter, who had walked and talked with Jesus for 3.5 years, ministered with him, saw people brought back to life, saw Jesus interpret the scriptures, preach them, the one that wrote the scriptures as they're preaching it. Evidently, Peter had never been given any kind of inkling that what was once unclean is now unclean, and he served quite literally at the foot of Jesus. He says, "Not so, Lord, for I have never eaten anything common or unclean." And a voice spoke to him again the second time, "What God has cleansed, you must not call common." This was done 3 times, and the object was taken into heaven. By the way, how many times did Peter deny Jesus? 3 times. How many times was the sheet let down? 3 times. How many times did Jesus tell him to go feed his sheep, feed his lambs? 3 times. So this is connected with a lesson to Peter. Peter was a good Jew, with all the good and bad that goes along with that. He was a very prejudiced person too. And in the Jewish culture, you would not associate with Gentiles. Gentiles, anybody that's not considered a Jew. You wouldn't touch them because you'd be considered unclean. So this was a very, shall we say, close-minded, programmed mentality that Jesus needs to shape a little bit. So this was done 3 times, and the object was taken up into heaven again. Now, while Peter wondered within himself what this vision he had seen meant, did Peter know what it meant? Yes or no? No, he said, "Man, what on earth did that mean?" He wondered what it meant. "Behold, the men who had been sent from Cornelius had made inquiry for Simon's house and stood before the gate, and they called and asked whether Simon, whose surname was Peter, was lodging there." So Peter is he's up on the rooftop resting. In this vision, then there's a knock. Hey, would you come and preach the gospel at Cornelius' house? And Cornelius was of the Latin band. We see this in Acts. He was not a Jew. So now he's called, when he's been ministering strictly to Jews, now he's called to minister to the Gentiles. Then he said to them, "You know how unlawful it is for a Jewish man to keep company with or go to one of another nation, but God has shown me that I should not call any," what did he say? "Man common or unclean." Has nothing to do with animals. God was using this symbolic image so Peter, in his very Jewish mindset, could understand. It made good sense to him. "I get it, God. You're not talking about animals. I should not call any man common or unclean." And in Acts 10:34, then Peter opened his mouth and said, "In truth, I perceive that God shows no partiality." And that's good news. What this is a lesson on is not God changing, what was unclean is now clean. Wasn't the point at all. That's why we've got to read in context. Had to do with Peter being commissioned to go to anybody that wants to hear the gospel to go. So I think that we're safe if we just stick with the Bible. The enemy, the devil, he wants to kill you. He does. And you might think, why does he want to kill me? What have I ever done to him? Nothing. He doesn't really care about you. He wants to kill you because he knows that it hurts Jesus. If someone went after me, it's another one, big deal. There'll be another one the next day. Someone goes after my kids, different story. Then we got problems. Same thing with Jesus. And he knows that when the devil launches attacks on his children, he's trying to hurt Jesus. So if he can get his children to die early, then the devil has been effective. If he can get God's children to be sickly, to where their mind cannot make good, clear decisions, the devil has been effective. Romans chapter 12, verse 1. "I beseech you, therefore, brethren, by the mercies of God, that you present your bodies a living sacrifice, wholly acceptable to God, which is your reasonable service. And do not be conformed to this world, but be ye transformed by the renewing of your mind, that you may prove what is that good and acceptable and perfect will of God. What are we supposed to present our bodies as? Living sacrifice. Some of you have seen the news recently, and the recent connection between Tylenol and autism. And if you have seen that, you may start to wonder, but I haven't taken it my whole life. And is it possible that's new data? And some may say, well, it's trumped up data. But are you willing to take the chance? If there's a chance that it could negatively affect that way, are you willing to take the risk? If there's a chance God's health principles are correct, wouldn't you want to take that? If there's a chance that if we step away from God's ideal, that affects us, are you willing to take the chance? God has, He's done it right in the first place. He's done a good job creating us, and He's handed us an owner's manual to say this is the best way to operate this machine. You know, when I got a new car a number of years ago, first thing I did was grab the owner's manual and I started looking through it. How do I make this thing last as long as possible? What's the maintenance schedule? And I make sure I do it on time every single time, because cars are expensive. Your body was far more expensive than any car, and Jesus died for us. So the best way that we can actually honor Him is to give it all to Him. And if there's a chance that some of this unhealthy things are connected with abomination, if there's the chance that something as simple as that choice could keep me actually out of heaven, are you willing to take that chance? I guess that's the question. But let's be honest also, it's tough. God, but it tastes so good. Yeah, of course it tastes good. It's delicious. That's why God has to tell us not to eat it. If it tastes like cardboard, He wouldn't have to tell us that. But this is one of those points where sometimes we need to get on our knees and say, God, give me the strength. I want to follow You. How many of you are willing to follow God today with these principles?